Welcome back, everyone, to another week of Ramban ala Parsha, and this is a special one because Beha'alotekha, for some reason, is my favorite Parsha in the Torah. It doesn't matter much to you, but there are, I don't know, 7 or I didn't count, like individual fascinating stories. And to get an overall theme, you have to work hard on it. The Rav Soloveitchik has an amazing lecture on this on YU Torah, if you want to look there. The idea for picking out a theme of the Parsha is fascinating, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to pick out a number of Rambans that are important to the Ramban and important to our understanding of major stories in the Parsha. The Parsha begins, of course, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe limod daber l'Aharon v'amarto elav Beha'alotekha hanerot el mul pnei ha-Menorah ya'iru yeshivat hanerot. And everyone wants to know why here, why now, right? Why is the story or the commandment to light the menorah found at the beginning of Beha'alotekha after, the Korbanot Nesiim and before all the other stories? What's the purpose of the chronological order of the Torah? So the Ramban starts, Beha'alotekha, our question, Lama nismecha parshat menorah lachanukat Nesiim? Right? What do they have to do with each other? So the Ramban, quoting Rashi, quoting the Medrash, Lefi kishera'a Aharon chanukat Nesiim Chalsha da'ato shelo haya imahem b'chanukah lo hu v'lo shivto. Aharon saw all the other Nesiim, all 12 Nesiim, Menashe and Ephraim being the 12th, being mitnadev the Korbanot and Nesiim, and he didn't, and he wasn't part of that. And he was literally, Rav Amital Zatzal used to translate it, he was depressed. Chalsha da'ato, he was depressed. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so God answered him, Chayecha Shelecha gidola mishelahem. No, you have a bigger part of the Beis HaMikdash than they do, a bigger part of the Mishkan. Why? She'ata madliku meitiv et hanerot boker va'erev. You have the zchus of lighting the menorah and cleaning it out morning and night. Okay, and Rama says that's Rashi from the Agada. So it's interesting, right? Aharon is depressed because he didn't bring a korban. He wasn't part of the Chanukat HaMizbeach of the Nesiim. And God says to him, don't feel bad. There's a great thing left for you in the Mishkan. You're going to be madlik umeitiv the neirot. And the Ramban, quite, common sensely says, V'lo nitbarerli lama nichamo bahadlakat haneirot. Right? If Aharon was disappointed or depressed, why did God console him by saying, you'll get to light the menorah? He has 1,000 more important things to do. V'lo nichamu b'ketoret boker va'erev sheshibchu bo hakatuv, right? Yosimu ketara ba'pecha. People love the Ketoret. Why doesn't it say that Aharon gets to bring the Ketoret every day? Ubechol Korbanot ubimninchat chavitin, a special korban for the Kohen Gadol. Uva'avodat Yom HaKippurim she'enak shera elabo. He does all the avodat Yom HaKippurim. A zar who does avodat Yom Kippur is chayav misa. He does everything. V'nichnas lifnai v'lifnim. Right? One Jew in history, or one Jew at a time, gets to go in the Kodesh HaKadashim. That Jew is the Kohen Gadol. Aharon HaKohen is the only person in the world, not Moshe, not Elazar, not Itamar, just Aharon HaKohen gets to go into the Kodesh HaKadashim. Why didn't God say to him, don't be disappointed, you get to go into the Kodesh HaKadashim? That makes complete sense. Vishahu Kadosh Hashem Omeid Behechalo Lisharto L'Verech Bishmo. Right? He's the chosen of the chosen. Vishivto Kulam Misharte Elokeinu. And he's the head of a tribe, all of whom worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's their job in life. In addition, he says, Va'od. Once the Ramban gets going, like we've seen this before, he really pounds the point home. Va'od. Matam lachalisha dadat hazo. Why in the world would Aharon be depressed? Valo Korbanot gadol mishal Nesiim. She'ikriv biyamim ha'im Korbanot harbe kol yimei ha'miluim. He brought Korbanos all of the days of the Miluim, all the days that preceded this. So now the Ramban suggests something which he's going to reject, but which I remember Rav Amital Zatzal thought was the answer. The Ramban says, V'im tomar shahayu chova v'nitztaveh bahem. If you want to say, well, all of Aaron's jobs were mandatory. He had to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim. That was the role. He had to bring the Korbanos HaMiluim. He had to do all these things. V'chalsha da'ato al shalo hikriva nidava kimohem lechanukat hamizbeach. And Aharon was depressed because he hadn't thought to volunteer. And everybody knows that volunteering is more fulfilling and it's more meaningful than doing obligatory work. So he says, Ramban, yeah, but gam hadlakat haneirot shenichamo bo chova v'nitztava aleh. Well, then how would it help for God to say to Aharon, oh, don't worry, you bring madlik u'meitiv the neiros, but that's obligatory. Okay, so the Ramban suggests this possible idea. Maybe it's because he didn't get to volunteer, and there's a spirit of volunteerism that's different than doing things you're obligated to do. But he thinks that that wouldn't be the case, because otherwise, why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu menachem him with the Menorah and with the Hatavas HaNeiros? But I remember Rav Amital said he thought, no, this was the answer. That Aharon, we have a sense that volunteering is better than doing that which you're required to do. If you volunteer in an organization, when you come in, you're a hero. Everybody says, wow, that's great, so nice to see you, nice, it's nice you're here. All the people who are there, they work. That's their job. Halacha says, Gadola mitzuveh v'oseh mimi she'eino mitzuveh v'oseh. Right, now why would that be? So I had a Rebbe, Rav Parna Zatzal, in 8th grade, who told me the following, I still remember it. He said, let's say your parents are going out on a Moshe Shabbos. I was a kid at the time. He said, and you think to yourself, you know what? I'm going to surprise my mother. I'm going to clean up the kitchen. Well, all the dishes are out. They're rushing out. I'm going to do this. It's going to be great. Okay? And you're all excited to do it. And your parents leave, and your mother turns around as she leaves the house, and she says, oh, by the way, Ellie, can you please clean up the kitchen while we're gone? It's so deflating, because you wanted it to be an Eino Mitzuvah V'oseh. You wanted the excitement of surprising your mother by what you're doing, but now she's taken all that away from you by telling you to do it. Where's the excitement? So that's the role of a Ben Torah, to embrace his obligation. I'm not doing it for me. It was like a not Rav Amital Vort, I would say, but he said it. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it because I'm obligated, and that's why Madlik u'meitiv et haneirot. Madlik, I could understand. It's exciting maybe to light the menorah. But meitiv, to clean it out, to take out the garbage, to get dirty? Where's the joy in that? And the answer is the medrash that says, Melamed shalosh shina. Vayas Aharon melamed shalosh shina. That's exactly the point. The medrash says that Aharon HaKohen embraced his obligation. And he didn't even let his sons do it. He did it his whole life. Because he found meaning. The lesson of the menorah is that Aharon thought, no, the things that I have to do don't give me meaning. The things that I volunteer to do give me meaning. And the answer is no. He learned through the menorah that it's the opposite, that Gadola mitzuveh v'oseh. I want to feel obligated and I want to feel meaning by fulfilling my obligations. And that's what he learned here. Okay? But it's a Shir Ramban, and the Ramban thinks that that's not the pshat. Ramban suggests it, but it's not what he does. So what does the Ramban think? We'll just mention it. We don't have enough time to do it. But it's an amazing, amazing Ramban. Maybe next year. Aval inyan ha'hagada hazo, says the Ramban, lidrosh remez min ha'parsha al chanukah shel neirot shahaita bebayit sheni al yidei Aharon uvanav ritzoni lomar chashmonai kohen gadol. Amazing Ramban. Says the Ramban, when God says to Aharon, no, you'll feel better because you'll be madlik u'meitiv haneirot, the Ramban says, it's definitely not pshat. The Ramban says, no, he's referring to Chanukah. The Chashmonaim were Kohanim. They were descendants of Aharon. And there they volunteered to do, right? Everybody has the same question on Chanukah. Either just be madlik the neiros betumba hutra b'tzibur, right? Or don't be madlik the neiros, so you'll wait. No, but the Chashmonaim, in the spirit of Aharon, in the spirit of volunteerism, said, no, we're going to do it anyway. And they lit the Neiros, and they stayed lit for 8 days. And so it's an amazing Ramban, which everybody could read at home. But that's the pshat. Says the Ramban, the answer is not the difference between volunteerism and an obligatory work, which Rav Amital thinks is the pshat. Rather, the difference is that Aharon will have in the future descendants who will volunteer and who will literally make up a holiday. It's only Drabanan, but the holiday of Chanukah is made up by the Kohanim, the descendants of Aharon, the Chashmonaim. Okay, let's move on. Perek Tet. Here, it's significant in the Ramban's Parshanut, and it's significant in our understanding of the Torah. Says the Perek, says the Torah, Vayidaber Hashem Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'shana hashenit, the second year, Litzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim, which month? B'chodesh harishon lemor. So it's Nisan of the second year. It's 12 months after Yitzias Mitzrayim. Okay, nothing surprising about that, except Midbar begins with the following pasuk: Vayidar Hashem Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Ohel Moed be'echad lachodesh hasheni b'shana hashenit. Be'echad lachodesh hasheni is Iyar. So what happens to the Ramban? There's a chronology to the Torah. Here it seems obvious. Midbar came after Beha'alotekha. What's the Ramban going to do with that? But for us, it's not a problem at all. First, the Ramban says, Mikan amru chachamim ein mukdam u'mu'uchar b'Torah. Okay, from here specifically, the chachamim say that there's no chronological order to the Torah. But the diuk here, if we need it, and I don't think we need it, the diuk is Mikan amru, meaning regularly, usually, there is a chronological order. It doesn't matter what came first. There are specific cases, Mikan amru. In this specific case, in Midbar, it's not the case. But the Ramban has to explain it, right? And really, Pshat is as follows. Rashi says, Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. Does Rashi think that Avraham Avinu was born before Noach? Of course not. Rashi knows there's an order to the Torah. All Rashi says by Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah is that often, or sometimes, the Torah, for educational purposes or to make a bigger point, changes the order. But in the absence of that, of course it's the case that there is a chronological order to the Torah. I think the Ramban is similar to that. We've mentioned it before. The Ramban would say there is an order to the Torah unless the Torah says otherwise. Right? Rashi's more loose with the unless part. But both of them agree, and this is something that I've heard from Rav Menachem Leibtag many, many times. The Ramban recognizes there are specific cases in the Torah where the order is not chronological, like Perek Tet Pasuk Aleph of Sefer Bamidbar. And Rashi just thinks there are more examples of that. But obviously they both think there's an order to the Torah. Okay, so if that's the case, why is this order changed? So says the Ramban, V'tam ha'ichur hazeh, the reason why Beha'alotekha is put after Bamidbar and Naso, haya ki ka'asher ba'hasefer hazeh ha'revi'i, lahazkir ha'mitzvot shenitztavu Yisrael b'Midbar Sinai l'sha'atam. Remember the Ramban in his Hakdama says that Bamidbar is not mitzvahs ledoros, they're mitzvahs l'sha'atam, just temporary mitzvahs. So ratzal hashlim inyan oel moed v'tikuno kol yom imei hamidbar. Says the Ramban, it's simple. The Torah wants the focus matters, right? Torah wants to tell us how we camped. Torah wants to tell us how we travel. Torah wants to tell us the masaot. Those things come before the mitzvah of the menorah, not because they're more important or less important, but because the Torah works thematically. And so we have to first tell everybody how this setup worked in the Mishkan. V'hizkir tchila hadigalim u'makom o'el ha'ohel u'ma'amad mishartav. So first it tells us the flags, how the Shvatim camped, and where the Ohel was, and where the Leviim camped. V'tikun ha'mishmarot l'masa l'chol avodat ha'ohel, and how they carried it. V'hizkir Korbanot Nesiim sheheviu ha'agalot asher yisu oto bahen kol eitei otam bamidbar. And then it mentions the Korbanot Nesiim, which included gifts of covered wagons, which they were going to use to carry the Mishkan. V'hishlim Korbanot b'chanukat hamizbeach shayu me'achad b'nisan o she'achar lekain. Okay, big discussion of what that means, but let's leave it for now. V'achar kach shav lahazkir azhara she'hizhir otam shelo yishgechu mitzvat ha'Pesach. Then it mentions Pesach Sheni. Okay? So the Ramban simply says there's a really good reason for Beha'alotekha coming after Bamidbar and Naso. It's true. Practically speaking, Beha'alotekha came first. But we want to do these things thematically. We want to make it clear this is how they camped in the Midbar. This is the theme of Sefer Bamidbar. After we're finished with all that, okay, let's mention the lighting of the menorah. And this leads us to the second point of the Ramban, which is unrelated to the first point, but it's fascinating in its own right. And that is Pesach Sheni. Okay? And the question is, what's it doing here at all? Not chronologically, but why is it in the Torah at all? The Torah already commanded us to bring Korban Pesach. We don't often find in the Torah, this is a reminder, right? No, that's the second one. The first one is Vayidaber Hashem Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Shana Hashanit l'Tzeitam Eretz Yisrael b'Chodesh HaRishon Lemor v'Ya'asu b'nei Yisrael et HaPasach b'Moado. Okay, Yashikach. B'nei Yisrael did the mitzvah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded them to do. We don't have every year B'nai Yisrael took a lulav. B'nai Yisrael, celebrated Pesach every year. What's going on here? So says the Ramban. This is really, really significant. It could be that the Torah had to tell us about Korban Pesach b'Shana Hashenit ba'avur shelo nitztavu mitchila ba'asiyat Pesach dorot ela ba'aretz. Says the Ramban, even though we don't think so, that Korban Pesach is a mitzvah hatzluya ba'aretz. So if you asked me, I would have said, and if you asked most of us, I think we would say, no, if I'm in chutz la'aretz, so I can't bring a Korban Pesach, because it has to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash. But it doesn't make it a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, right? Trumas u'mayis is a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz. If I harvest my land in California, so there's no mitzvah to be makriv trumas u'maisros. But says the Ramban, no, with respect to Pesach, it's a mitzvah hatluya ba'aretz. Dichsiv v'haya ki tavo el haaretz asher yitein Hashem lachem kasher diber u'shmartem et ha'avodah azot. The pasuk, which we've forgotten already in Bo, tells us, when you come into Eretz Yisrael, you'll bring the Korban Pesach. Before that, you won't. V'od ne'emar sham v'haya ki v'yacha Hashem el eretz haknani v'avadeta ha'avodah azot b'chodesh hazeh. Now, the Ramban knows, and this is what I think confuses us, the Ramban knows there was a Pesach Mitzrayim. Okay, but it seems like Pesach Mitzrayim was a one-off. Right? Pesach Mitzrayim, we put blood on the door, on the mashkof and the shtei mezuzot. We didn't do that in any other Korban Pesach. We didn't do that in Eretz Yisrael, right? So there's a thing called Pesach Mitzrayim, which is the same but different than Pesach Dorot. And Pesach Dorot is only knowing in Eretz Yisrael. It's a mitzvah tzluya ba'aretz. Okay, well then the question is, so why do it in the Midbar? Right? It's a great idea. Okay, Korban Pesach is a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz. Okay, so what's going on in our parsha? Why command them to do it now? And here's an unbelievable thought in the Ramban. Va'achshav ratza hakadosh baruch hu v'tziva sheya'asu oto. Nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw an educational need for bringing Korban Pesach. Kidei shetihiyeh zecher geulatam v'hanisim shena'asu lahem v'la'avotehem ne'etak lahem min ha'avot haroim livnehem uvnehem l'dor acher. Says the Ramban, God wanted to establish Pesach as a significant event for Bnei Yisrael. And to do that, they needed to bring Korban Pesach in the Midbar. When they did it last year in Mitzrayim, it was, they didn't need it as a sign. They didn't do it as a sign. They did it more as a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were leaving Mitzrayim the next day. We don't need to remember the fact that we're leaving Mitzrayim the next day. We did it because that's part of Avodas Hashem. But now, the next year, and the beginning of the next generation, they needed to establish it as a kind of worship. V'hinei amar tchila, v'yaki tavo el haaretz, lomar she'ein mitzvah zo noheget b'chutz haaretz l'dorot. Right, that's clear. V'yaki tavo el haaretz, there's no mitzvah of Korban Pesach in chutz haaretz. V'achshav tziva sheyinhagu ba b'midbar. But there is a mitzvah to bring it in the Midbar, which is, by the way, a fascinating point. Like, the Midbar is clearly chutz la'aretz, but it's not classic chutz la'aretz, right? Once we're in the Midbar, we're on our way to Eretz Yisrael. It's like you're on the El Al flight. You're on the Aliyah party flight. The stewardesses are all cheering you on. You're going. So what exactly is the status of the Midbar? It's not 100% clear. So this is the Ramban. Va'al dat rabotenu lo asuota ela b'shana zo bilvad shelo hayu yicholim la'asota. Okay, this is more well known to us. Chazal say that Bnei Yisrael only did the Korban Pesach in Shana 2, not in any of the years there in the Midbar, because they couldn't. Lefi shenoldu lahem banim va'avadim V'lo yachlu limolotam min hatam shizkiru shayalahem l'sakana k'moshe mefush b'yivamot. Right? Bnei Yisrael have to travel at any time. Bris Milah in those days, and even nowadays, has an element of danger to it. It really does. The person who has a Bris Milah is a chola. He's a chola sheish bo sakana at the beginning. Now, we might have to travel on any day in the Midbar. So the rule was you couldn't do a Bris Milah in the Midbar, and this is played out, when Yoshua was Mal B'nei Yisrael Ba Gilgal, right? Ki lo malu B'nei Yisrael Ba Midbar, and there was nothing wrong with that. Now, why does that stop people from bringing Korban Pesach? So the answer, we all know this. The answer is because if you have someone in your household, a child certainly, and even an Eved, who's an Arel, who didn't have a Bris Milah, so then you're prohibited halachically from bringing a Bris Milah, right? Your obligation is to circumcise your entire household, and you didn't do it. Okay, but now, is this a technical answer? Could they have gotten around it? Should they have tried? So the Ramban is clear about this. I'm skipping a bunch, but let's just read the very end of this Ramban. V'yitachen shehaginut hazeh hu kalkalatam b'inyan hamraglim. Says the Ramban, Chazal saw it as a gnus. It was an insult to Bnei Israel that they only brought Korban Pesach once in the Midbar. And the Ramban suggests that it was an insult to them because they had sinned with the Miraglim. Shemimena nitnadu. Okay, God forgave them. It's true. It's next week's parasha. God forgives us for the Miraglim. But it doesn't fix everything, right? There's still a sense that you sinned. V'lo nashva lahem haruach hatzfonit v'lo malu. Right? This is an expression that you find some places. The healing wind, the ruach hatzfonit, the northern healing wind is what Bnei Israel needed to do bris milah, and they didn't. Therefore, on some level, they were rejected by God. So it is an insult. If you're going to ask on the Ramban, what do you mean? Don't Chazal say that bignutan shel bnei Yisrael shalom malu 40 shana b'midbar? That's true. But it's true because Bnei Yisrael felt like they were rejected by God. Yes, they were forgiven, but again, and we'll talk about it more next week, they were forgiven, but they have to spend the next 39 years in the Midbar. And those are not 39 happy years. There's a sense that we've done something terribly wrong. And the Ruach Tzfonit is not blowing. And maybe God doesn't want us to do a Bris Milah. We feel uncomfortable. We're not confident that if we do a Bris Milah, God's going to protect our children. Something along those lines. Okay? And so the Ramban says that, both sides are true, right? They didn't have to do Bris Milah in the Midbar. They didn't have to bring a Korban Pesach in the Midbar. And they technically were patur, but in a better world, they would have done bris milah, they would have trusted God to heal the people, and then they would have been able to bring a Korban Pesach. Okay, so he says, so in the end, v'hayu risha'in la'asoto v'nitatzlu, v'lo asuoto, their laziness, v'hu ginut gadol, it's a big deal. Aval harishon, the first Pesach, hu yoter nachon be'inai. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There are two pshatim. And then the Ramban says, Aval Harishon, the first pshat, hu yoter nachon beinai, ki hayam Moshe machricham la'asoto. He says, if they had a chiyuv of Korban Pesach in the Midbar, and they didn't do it because they had arelim in their families, for whatever reason, because they didn't believe God would help them, it would have been okay, technically, not to bring Korban Pesach. Right? It says the Ramban, but Moshe Rabbeinu was there. He would have told me, you have to bring Korban Pesach. So he thinks, no, they couldn't do Bris Milah. There was no chiyuv of Korban Pesach in the Midbar. Because if there was a chiyuv of Korban Pesach, it's inconceivable that Moshe and Aharon, and they wouldn't have said to them, listen, it's Yud Daled Nisan, you got to bring Korban Pesach today. They could have said, well, we're not, yeah, but you got to do it. So the Ramban sort of rejects that idea in favor of what he said originally, which is a bit of a chiddush, which is Korban Pesach is a mitzvah hatluya ba'aretz, really a mitzvah hatluya ba'aretz, and therefore they were patur during the 40 years in the Midbar, except for the second year when HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervened and said, significant that you bring Korban Pesach this year, that people see that it's an important ritual, and then the next 38 years you won't do it. Okay? That, I think, is a fascinating Ramban and an insightful one about Korban Pesach, and it raises the question of the status of the Midbar for Bnei Yisrael. Okay, that's something that people have to think about on their own. Many, many stories in the Parsha come to the very end of the Parsha. A fascinating story, sad story, of the siblings speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. It's Perek Yud Bet. And the psukim read as follows. Vatidaber Miriam va'Aharon b'Moshe alodot ha'isha kushit asher lakach ki isha kushit lakach. Okay, they spoke Lashon Hara. It's not exactly clear about Moshe's isha kushit. Different pshatim, it doesn't matter. Vayamru harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem alo gambanu diber vayishma Hashem v'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei adama. What's that pasuk doing there? Thematically, we understand, like you feel like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is upset, and he says, what are you talking about? You're speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the most anav person. But the Ramban wants to know, in the narrative, like what's the pasuk doing there? It's so out of place. It's like, the editor of the Torah put in a pasuk in its not proper place. So the Ramban is all over it. And he's going to quote 3 pshatim. They're all similar, and they often go to the same point, and I think the point is, what does it mean to be an anav? So first the Ramban says his own pshat. Lahagid ki Hashem ki, this is Perek Yud Bet Pasuk Gimel. Lahagid ki Hashem kinei lo ba'avu anvitanuto. Right? Sorry, it's a hard word. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu was jealous for Moshe because he's such an anav. Ki hu lo ya'anel riv. Moshe's not going to say anything. He's Moshe Rabbeinu, for God's sakes. Af im yeda, even if he heard. Right? The Ramban assumes Moshe Rabbeinu did not know that his siblings spoke Lashon Hara about him. But even had he known, he wouldn't have said anything. And God intervened. Ki'ilu, he was offended for Moshe Rabbeinu. If Moshe's not going to say anything, God is going to say something. Okay, so first of all, it sort of raises the issue of how you respond to Lashon Hara. Right? It sounds like in certain circumstances, there's a reason to respond to Lashon Hara. I'm just putting it out there. Second, says the Ramban, Rabbi Avraham the Ibn Ezra mefaresh v'amar ki hu lo hayom mevakesh gedula al shum adam. Moshe wasn't trying to be better than anybody else. V'lo yitga'eh b'ma'alato klal, and he wasn't haughty. He wasn't holding it over anybody. Af ki alachiv, he wasn't trying to be better than Aharon. V'heim chotim shemidabrim alav chinam. Okay, it's close to the Ramban's first pshat, which is Moshe wasn't going to say anything. It didn't dawn on him to say anything. He didn't need to be better than anyone. So God stepped in to defend him. Third pshat, Aval b'sifri Rab Nasan Omer, Af b'fanav shel Moshe dibru bo. No, the Sifrei thinks Moshe knew about the Lashon Hara. They said it in front of him. Shenemar vayishma Hashem va'ish Moshe anav ma'od. Right, the point is you're supposed to understand that God heard and Moshe heard, but didn't do anything about it because he's a big anav. Ela shekavash Moshe ala davar yazkir an v'tanuto shesavalo v'lo anam v'Hashem kinelo. Okay, this of course raises, and we'll just do it very quickly, the fundamental chakira. It's funny to say it's a chakira, but what does it mean to be an anav? Is an anav a person who doesn't know his greatness and doesn't know that he's better than other people? Or is an anav a person who knows his greatness and knows that he's better than other people, and yet acts in a different way? I think it's inconceivable that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know that he was better than other people. That Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. Of course he knew. And the story kind of proves it out. Because you would think that Aaron HaKohen would be, if Aaron HaKohen was davening for me, I would feel better. But Aaron HaKohen turns to Moshe and he says, our sister has tzaras, do something. And Moshe does it, and God responds to him. Okay, she has to wait for 7 days, whatever. But that doesn't happen to human beings. So I would submit to you, inconceivable that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know who he was, but he didn't act that way. It didn't mean anything to him. He never thought of himself as being better than. He just thought himself as being Moshe Rabbeinu. And maybe he had issues, maybe he didn't fulfill his potential. All of us have to be the best version of ourselves. We don't have to be better than other people. There's a lot to be said there. We're out of time. So let's stop here. We basically saw 3 or 3.5 Rambans today. The beginning, what's this parsha of the Menorah doing here? Was Aharon depressed? Was he depressed because he didn't volunteer and he should have volunteered? And the Ramban's answer, a fascinating answer, no. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was menachem Aharon by saying the Chashmonaim are going to light the menorah in the future in a way that's going to make you proud. Okay, it's unbelievable that the Ramban thinks that that's a pshat in the pasuk. We talked about Ein Mukdam U'Char BaTorah. Obviously, there's a chronology. The Ramban thinks when it's clear, when and only when it's absolutely clear in the Torah that this pasuk came before another pasuk, then you look for the explanation. Here, the explanation is the Torah wanted to finish setting up how things worked in the Midbar. Then they could tell us about the Menorah. Then they could tell us about Pesach Sheni. What's Pesach Sheni? Not Pesach Sheni, Pesach Rishon. It also includes Pesach Sheni. What's Pesach Rishon doing here? The unbelievable pshat of the Ramban that Korban Pesach is a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, and yet God overruled the halacha because Korban Pesach is so important, so they brought it only in the second year, not the other years. And finally, we saw Va'ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, right? That God stepped up for Moshe Rabbeinu because he knew that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't going to answer. Again, that raises the possibility that sometimes, in certain circumstances, answering Lashon Hara is the right thing to do. It also raises the question of what it means, Va'ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, and we suggested what we suggested. Have a great, great Shabbos, and see you next week.